But Magnus does not want any part of that, so he finds an alternative to keep the game going, which is this move pawn to b4, attacking the queen. Now it's a very important move to note, because now if black say moves the queen to c7, for example, you're like, well, what's the difference? The difference is that after rook to e1, now the queen is no longer on c5, from whence it can go to f2, and now black would have to queen this, not Megan, right? Sorry, black would have to queen this pawn, but after rook takes queen, queen takes rook, white can go e6, and after queen to f4, white has this beautiful move g3, blocking. And let's just say black goes queen to f3, white can trade everything off here. And once we look at the math of the position, you'll notice that white has 1 2 3 4, black has 3 pawns. White will eventually deflect with this pawn on the queen side, and something like this will happen, and you run the king over, win the pawns, make a queen, and checkmate your opponent. So after b4, Praggnanandhaa finds the move queen c3, which is a better move, because now this stops white from playing rook e1, which would prevent the pawn on c2 from queening. But Magnus has another idea in his hat here, which is to play the move f4. So Praggnanandhaa makes a second queen, and now we get this move f5. And at first glance, you're like, wait, black has 2 queens, but then you realize, even though black has 2 queens, the queens cannot check the king here. King is very safe. The rook on e4 covers the f4 square. There's no queen g3 either. So if black doesn't have something right away, white is actually going to checkmate black. Because say you play a move like queen a1, I go f6 check, king to h7, take the pawn, and after king to h8, I have queen g7 checkmate. So even though black has 2 queens here, white is the one trying to attack. So Pragg finds queen c7, which is the only move here, because now you guard the pawn on f7. So after f6, we get king to h7, and now we get queen f8, threatening checkmate on g7. Pragg finds, again, the only move, queen takes e5 check, rook takes queen, and now this moves queen f4 check. We get king g1, queen c1, and Magnus goes king f2 here. If Magnus had gone king h2 after queen to f4, we would have seen a repetition once again, and the game would have ended in a draw. So we get king to f2 being played, queen to f4 here check, queen f4 check is played, Magnus goes king e2, queen takes king d3, we get queen takes f6, and now let's move queen to e8. So the dust is kind of settled. Black has had to give back the extra queen for the rook. At the same time, we have the same number of pawns on the board, but there is an imbalance here because white has 2-on-1 on the queen side. You have a and b pawns versus a pawns, and in queen and pawn endgames, the most important rule is trying to create passed pawns. Now for black, it's very hard here. G pawn on g5 is blockaded by the pawn on g2. Trying to get the f and g pawns rolling down the board is going to take a lot of time, and your king is going to become vulnerable. Say you were to try and do something like this, you always run into moves like queen g6, and you lose the pawn on h6. So the dust is kind of settled, but it's still very unclear what's happening because even though black should be all right, white has these 2 pawns and will try to create a passed pawn on the queen side. So we get queen to f1, Magnus goes king d4, we get king g7, not queen takes g2 here, by the way, because now white can play queen d. I thought queen e4 was winning, although maybe you can actually do it the other way. You go queen takes f7, king h8, check, and then you do it this way where you get queen e4, and you have the 2 pawns on the queen side, which are simply winning. But black should not take the pawn on g2. So we get king g7 played by Pragg here to guard the pawn on f7. Magnus goes queen e5 check, king g8, queen b8, king g7, and now let's move queen to g3. Magnus is simply trying to set up the ideal position to start pushing the pawns on the queen side, and I think the rationale behind putting the king on g7 is that now there always are more ideas to block with the queen, where you can move the king with check. So say black goes queen a1 and then play something like queen g1. Now you have king d5, which is a check. So by doing this little maneuver of checking and then putting the queen on g3, now the black king is on a dark square and the queen can check it from either the c3 or e5 square. So we get queen to d1, king to c5 is played here by Magnus, queen takes h5. Now temporarily Praggnanandhaa is up a pawn here, but you will notice that white is trying to get a passed pawn on the queen side. So we get queen e5, king g8, and now Magnus plays this move a4. Now this actually throws away any chances of winning the game, but for us puny humans who are not computers, it's very difficult to see any reason not to play. The computer, however, likes I think queen b. I think there was some maneuver with like queen b8 and king b6, or maybe it was queen e8 and king b6, and the game goes on. But at any rate, he plays a4. We get queen to d1. We get a5 here. Now computer still thinks that after queen e8, king g7, there maybe is something with like king b6 along these lines, but still after queen to d6, king to a5 here, black has time to start pushing the h and the g pawns, and it should still be a draw. So Magnus goes a5, we get queen to g1, queen to d4, Praggnanandhaa takes the pawn, and now we get b5 being played here. Very simple idea by Magnus that if black takes, you can push the a pawn. Now it's worth noting that in this position, this a pawn is 2 squares away from queening, whereas both let's just say the h pawn is 1 2 3 4 5, and the g pawn is 1 2, and you have to move the queen 3 4 5 to queen, and the f pawn also is 1 2 3 4 5. So all these pawns, it's going to take five moves to get it down to the other end of the board, whereas the white pawn is only 2 squares away from the end. So you still have to be a little bit careful. However, in this position, Pragg finds another excellent move, which is he does not take the pawn, but he plays the move g4 here. We got b takes a6, and now this move g3. Now, as you'll notice, white's pawn will be 1 square away after a7, but after queen to a8, black's pawn is also going to be 1 square away from queening as well. And this maneuver of playing g4, g3 by Pragg, great understanding that in queen and pawn endgames, you have to use your pass pawns and get them down the board as fast as possible, even at the cost of losing the pawn on a6. So after queen e8, we get king d6 here. Praggnanandhaa plays g2. We get king e5, queen to f3, check, king to h7. And now, as you see, when Magnus queens, black could trade the queens, obviously. Pragg decides to check on c3, which also is completely fine. We get queen to d4, takes. We get g1, queen, king to d3, queen to d1 here. We get king e3, queen e1, king d3, queen e1, and the game ends here in a draw. So what to say about the game? Magnus had his chances to win this game. He misattacked with knight takes f7. He had rook takes b6 as well. I would say that for Magnus, this was one of those games where he probably really wishes he could do it over again. But overall, it just feels like it hasn't quite been his turn. He's had some chances the last couple of rounds. He's been unable to win. And with that, he remains 1 point behind Nodirbek with 1 round to go. Now, before we end this recap, I will very briefly talk just about the game that was played between Nodirbek and Wesley So. Now, Wesley So playing with the white piece is also 1 point behind Nodirbek going into this round, and Wesley decides to play d4. We get d5, c4 takes, knight f3, knight f6, e3, e6, bishop takes c4, c5, castles, and a6. Now, the reason I mentioned this, I'm not going to go through the whole game, the game did end peacefully in a draw, is that Wesley chose to play this line with pawn takes pawn, bishop takes, and queens came off the board. Now, in my opinion, in this sort of situation where you're down by 1 point, you really need to take your shot and try to beat Nodirbek. Obviously, he's a very strong player. He's having the best tournament by far of anybody in the event. But when you are in such a situation, you're playing someone who should be nervous, someone who's young. This is potentially the biggest career result for Nodirbek. You have to try to put pressure on these youngsters to win the games, because in a situation like this, it's a little bit too easy for Nodirbek to play, and if he does not make an outright blunder, he will feel very comfortable throughout the game. So I thought that this choice by Wesley was definitely questionable. Nodirbek did hold his own quite easily and made the draw. So as it stands going into the final round, Nodirbek has the lead. He has 8 points out of 12. We have Anish Giri on 7.5 out of 12 after he saved the game against Jordan Van Forth. Big pity for those of you guys who are watching this recap, because I really wanted to cover that game, but alas, it ended in a draw. And then we have Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So both on 7 points. So barring something crazy happening tomorrow, Nodirbek will probably win the Tata Steel event. We'll see how he controls his nerves, but he does have the white pieces against Jordan Van Forth. Anish Giri also has a chance if he can win the last round against Richard Rapport to maybe force a tiebreak, but it's going to be very exciting. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap. I tried to make it a little bit simpler for people who are more along the lines of beginners, just make it a little bit easier to follow. So I hope you guys enjoyed this recap. Make sure to hit that subscribe button below, and we'll be back tomorrow with a recap of the final round of the Tata Steel Chess Masters. See you guys tomorrow. Have a good